Welcome to the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. I'm your host, registered dietitian and kidney stone expert, Melanie. After learning a ton about kidney stones and helping people prevent stones at the University of Chicago, I was fed up with all the terrible advice people were finding online. So I decided to do something about it. The Kidney Dietitian was born. This podcast is for people who want to learn what actually works to prevent kidney stones and still enjoy life, eating, and their favorite foods. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 5th episode of the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. I'm your host, dietitian and kidney stone expert, Melanie. And today I wanted to dive into a little bit of the science behind kidney stones. So if you are not a science nerd like me, then this episode may not be for you. But I do think it's so helpful and just interesting to think a little bit about what is a kidney stone in the first place. What makes a kidney stone? What is your body doing that is it's making a kidney stone? And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the science of why kidney stones form. And truly, all stones, no matter what kind we are talking about, really comes down to some sort of chemistry imbalance or something isn't quite right going on in your urine, of course, that makes a kidney stone form. So a kidney stone itself is just a crystallization of some solute that's in your urine, which is the solution. And I know that is probably sending many of us to terrible memories of high school chemistry, but bear with me. It's just a crystallization of stuff in your urine. And so there are things going on in your urine that's making that crystallization happen. And there's lots of different things that could be going on that's making that crystallization happen. So, of course, the first thing that could be going on in your urine that's making that happen is just simply the amount of solute, or the amount of stuff and little molecules that are floating around. All of us have some calcium. All of us have some oxalate and some phosphorus and some uric acid in our urine. That's literally how our bodies get rid of these waste products, essentially. I mean, calcium and other things certainly have functions in our body, but all of us are going to have some calcium in our urine. But the problem is when those amounts get so high, plus there's other stuff going on in your urine that's making that stone form. So the first thing that could be happening is that you just have too much of these molecules or this solute in your urine that is making that stone form. And actually, I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but the most common cause of kidney stones is really very high urine calcium. Having a ton of calcium in your urine is definitely makes you at a higher risk of forming stones, because if you have, your urine and you think about all those little molecules floating around, if there's more calcium in there, it's more likely to kind of hit and bind with that oxalate or other things that's in your urine and more likely to form stones. So just having too much of these stone forming things in your urine definitely makes kidney stones more likely. So that's definitely the first thing. Like I said, too much calcium, too much oxalate, too much uric acid, too much phosphorus. Some of these things could be happening. That's making kidney stones form in your body. The next thing that could be happening is that your urine just isn't high enough. So you don't have a very large urine volume, because based on what you're eating, your body has sort of a set amount of all of this stuff that it has to get rid of in your urine. This is the amount of calcium and oxalate and these things that it's going to get rid of, right? And if you aren't drinking very much water, it's going to get rid of that same amount of molecule in a smaller volume. And so there might be sort of a normal amount of calcium and oxalate or whatever kind of floating around, but if you aren't drinking very much, those molecules are going to be really concentrated and really, really close together, which is going to make that kidney stone more likely to form. So that is why we speak so much about drinking a ton of water for kidney stone prevention, because truly that's the only constant that's true for basically every single person with kidney stones, is that you really want to be drinking plenty of water to dilute your urine, to make the concentration of calcium and oxalate and whatever else is in your urine less, right? Your urine is more dilute, you're drinking more, that means you're not going to be as likely to form kidney stones. And that is why drinking water is kidney stone prevention 101. And people always ask, how much water, how much fluid should I be drinking? And my answer for most people is around 3 liters of fluid per day. Technically, the guidelines say that we should be drinking enough to produce at least 2.5 liters of urine output per day. So I say, just let's be safe, because we're going to lose fluid through speaking and our breath and through feces and other things. And so I say 3 liters of total fluid is a good goal for most people. So that equates to about 100 ounces for those of us that don't think in liters. So drinking water is so important, just to dilute those molecules and make them less likely to bump into each other in your urine and less likely to form kidney stones. So another thing that we think about when we dive into kidney stone prevention for you is your urine pH. So pH stands for power of hydrogen, which is really not important, but basically it's just a measurement of how much acid is in your urine or how much alkali is in your urine. So alkali is the opposite of acid. And you might think like, oh, acid is bad. We probably want very, very little acid. But that's not true. We actually want your urine to be in a very specific range, because if your pH is too high, meaning there's not enough acid in your urine or it's more alkali, that makes calcium phosphate stones more likely to form. But if your urine is too acidic or that pH is too low or it's closer to 1, so the pH scale is from 1 to 14, higher is less acid, lower is more acid. Kind of confusing, but not important. Basically, just know that your pH can impact kidney stone formation. Too high puts you at risk of calcium phosphate stones. Too low or too much acid means that you're definitely more likely to form uric acid stones. Having a very low urine pH is actually the biggest driver of uric acid stones, and also may make calcium oxalate stones more likely as well. So when we are looking at your 24-hour urine test, or you are interpreting your 24-hour urine test, you really want to be looking at pH, because that makes basically the conditions of your urine and certain types of stones more likely to form. So calcium oxalate stones like to form more when there's more acid in your urine. Uric acid stones definitely like to form more when there is more acid in your urine. So that's kind of how pH plays into this whole picture as well. And the last thing that we think about when we think about urine chemistry and kidney stone formation is a whole bunch of different kidney stone inhibitors. So by far the most common inhibitor that we think about is citrate. That is why lemon juice is so popular, and people say all the time like, oh, you should drink lemon juice if you have stones, which may or may not be the case. And also, a medication called potassium citrate is very commonly prescribed to people who have kidney stones to prevent kidney stones. Because when you have lots of citrate in your urine, it makes calcium stones much less likely to be formed. So that citrate makes it harder for calcium to bind to other things, basically, so you're less likely to form stones. And it's easy to think about these kidney stone inhibitors as sort of this sort of second thought thing, like, oh, like it's nice to have that citrate, but really they can play a huge role. I've definitely seen many people form kidney stones only because they have low urine citrate. Their volume is great, they have reasonable amounts of calcium and oxalate in their urine, but if that citrate is low in some people, that is enough to form kidney stones. And so these inhibitors can really play a very big role in kidney stone prevention. But the kicker is, with citrate, I always like to give this caveat because people think, oh, this is great, so I should definitely be taking this potassium citrate. I should definitely be drinking lemon juice. And we'll definitely talk more about lemon and citrate and these types of things on the podcast. And I have a lot of information about that on my blog as well. But just know that citrate is a very potent alkali source, or opposite of acid, which is great for many people. If you have uric acid stones or calcium oxalate stones and you have low urine pH, this citrate is great because it's going to add citrate and is also going to help increase your urine pH to be into maybe a more normal range. But we have to be very, very careful with prescribing potassium citrate or taking citrate supplements in any of the gazillions of forms that you can find them out there, because it will raise your urine pH. And if you are forming or prone to form calcium phosphate stones, that increase in pH could be pretty harmful. So you really want to make sure that you know what's going on in your urine before you implement any sort of kidney stone prevention plan. So So citrate, as I mentioned, is definitely the most well-known of these kidney stone inhibitors. But there are tons of other things out there. And honestly, we're probably only scraping the surface in terms of what we know. We probably don't know a lot of these kidney stone inhibitors that are out there. But the two that I think are most exciting, at least from a nutrition perspective, and these are very sort of new on the horizon, we just don't know a lot about them, and we're just kind of starting to dive in to understand a little bit more what these things can do for stone prevention. But the two that I love to talk about are magnesium and phytate. So we've known that there's some connection between magnesium and kidney stones for quite some time. We know that people who have lower levels of magnesium, both in their urine and in their blood, tend to form more kidney stones. But we're still kind of figuring out what we can do in terms of supplementation, because supplementation of magnesium hasn't really panned out the way that you might think it is. But I think that perhaps we see a lower risk of stones in people who consume a lot of magnesium-rich foods, people who consume diets that eat a lot of magnesium-rich foods. You find magnesium in things like whole grains, nuts, seeds, legumes, and those types of things. So I think that perhaps that is one of the many reasons why we see a lower risk of stones in people who consume many of these plant foods, if you will. The last inhibitor that I just wanted to touch on is something called phytate. And this one is, as I mentioned before, very new. We're learning so much more about it. But we think that phytate is a whole heck of a lot more potent or stronger in its ability to prevent stones than even citrate. And so phytate, I think, is something that's really exciting. You find phytate in similar foods to magnesium. You find phytate definitely in a lot of whole grains and beans and nuts and seeds. So you may notice a trend in these foods that are very rich in magnesium and phytate. They're exactly the foods that you're told to limit if you're following a low oxalate diet. And that's one of the reasons why I speak so strongly and say again and again and again why I really don't want us to be following a super low oxalate diet unless we have to, and many of us do not have to, because it's going to limit these other things that are good for us in general, but ironically likely good for kidney stone prevention as well. So lots to talk about these kidney stone inhibitors. There's so many different things, and it's such an interesting area since, like I said, we really don't know much about it. We've known about citrate, we've known about magnesium for some time, but phytate's relatively new, and there's lots of other ones that are being published in the research these days, and it's just an exciting time in kidney stone nutrition. Perhaps I'm biased, but I think so. So, hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully that gives you a little bit more understanding of what's going on in your body and what's making these kidney stones, and how complicated this can be. I think it's so easy to kind of just think like, well, I don't drink enough, or, well, I'm eating too much salt, but like, what's really going on? What's actually going on in your urine to form stones? So I think it's interesting to know that. I'm biased. I'm a kidney stone dietitian, but I think that it's interesting to understand that for some of us. So with that, I will close this 5th episode of the Eat Away Kidney Stone podcast, and I hope that you will tune in for the next one. Have a great day. Thank you for listening to today's episode. For more help with kidney stones, check out my website, www.thekidneydietitian.org. For more personalized help from me, check out my online course, Kidney Stone Nutrition School. VIP enrollment includes help directly from me. I can't wait to see you there and help you prevent kidney stones. Have a great day.